Welcome, and thank you, by the way, for your ongoing support of Rural Investment Media and the Vancouver Natural Resources Investment Conference. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure being here, Rick. Thanks very much.
Let's get right to it for our people. We've always talked about the importance of people in investments in natural resources. I'm delighted to say I've known you for the better part of 2 decades. I remember very well the first deal that you at least brought to me, which was First Quantum Minerals. I remember participating in a 65-cent financing, and I remember 5 or 6 years after that, the stock going above $100. To say that you got my attention is a bit of an understatement. Perhaps you could talk about the organization of First Quantum and how you built that company, how you developed. Let's talk about your first stock market success.
Sure. Well, thanks, Rick. And it really all comes down to people. I've been able to surround myself with good people throughout my career, and First Quantum was definitely an example of that. I met the management team when I met Phil Pascal, who had the asset, which we ended up buying, and Phil ended up becoming the chairman of that company, and I was the president at that time. I knew right away that we had a classy team, or a team that knew how to build mines. And I've never been an explorationist. I do invest in exploration stocks, of course, because I'm in the sector. But I've never put together an exploration company, really, because I just feel like it's a little bit too risky, and for my own to spend my own amount of time on it. So for me to have a development asset like the copper asset, Bonamacuba, that was our first acquisition, I knew it could be brought into production fairly quickly. And that was the entire reason for that acquisition. Just like I've duplicated throughout my career, buying assets that, have resources in the ground where it just lacks talent, which First Quantum had, and lacked money, which I was able to bring to the table. And you put those combinations together and add time to that. And it's amazing if everyone works together on the same path, the success that can be created.
When you put together First Quantum, were you copper centric, or did you come upon a person and an opportunity that just happened to be in copper?
It's a very good question, Rick. Back in the day, back in the early 90s, what was the hottest market? It was Venezuela gold. And if you remember, and Peru was hot at the time as well. So, of course, we were looking at gold assets in South America. But when I got the phone call, or at least Clive Newell got the phone call from Colin Bird in London regarding the Bonamacuba, that Phil Pascal had just walked into his office, and we decided to hop in an airplane and go visit him and this asset, I knew right away that we were going to do a copper deal in Africa. And I was so early. This is in the early 90s when no one was there. Like, our investment in Zambia was the first investment in something like 35 years. And then we were a real trailblazer in the copper belt. And then after we showed up, then a whole bunch of other Canadians, of course, showed up over the next 3, 4, 5 years. But, by that time, we were so far ahead of the game, and we were the purest copper company in the world. And when the copper bull market started, it was really the only place to invest. And the stock, just as you said earlier, just absolutely exploded. And it got up to $140 a share, and it got split. I think it was 3 to 1 or 5 to 1. I forget what it was. But anyways, I'm expecting a similar type of move in silver. And the reason why I chose silver versus gold is for the same reasons I chose copper versus gold, because it's a niche market, very few players in it. And when the bull market lights up for silver, which I think is going to happen, First Majestic will be one of the primary recipients.
Well, let's talk about that. You were obviously very right, very prescient in the copper market, despite the fact that you, by your own statement, were project driven as opposed to copper driven when you put together that great success at First Quantum. But you now say that you believe that the silver market has legs, or is about to have legs. Perhaps you can tell us briefly why you believe that to be the case.
Well, when I put the company together back in 2002, 2003, I always, because, I saw technology and when I did my analysis, I'm coming from a copper company. I guess I was somewhat biased away from gold, but the supply demand fundamentals of silver were reminding me of copper, and it just made sense to me. And when I looked at all the technologies that have come into play, and the above ground supplies of the metal dwindling the way it was, when photography came offline and when the government stopped producing coinage in the form of silver, there was an abundance of silver sitting around on the surface, not having a place to go. So the price of the metal collapsed, as it made sense. It should have, and it took several decades, about 3 decades actually, for that silver to be consumed in industry. And none of that silver is coming, or very little of that silver is actually coming back. It's in waste dumps and it's in the ocean or wherever it may be, but the cost of recycling it is just so high that at current metal prices, that this metal is not coming back anytime soon. We'll be mining waste dumps 100 years from now, looking for silver and other metals versus taking it out of the ground the way we do today. But we've got, and when I put the company together, we didn't have solar panels to speak of. We didn't have electric cars to speak of either. And now we've got solar panels breaching 100 million ounces of consumption in a market where we're only producing about 760 million ounces last year. So that's a pretty, and the year before that, it was 830 million from memory. So you've got a market that's consuming 12 to 13% of the world's supply of silver, and this is a relatively new industry. Then you add electric cars on top of that, and of course the auto industry doesn't want to tell you what they're using because they're paranoid that you and I are going to front run them. But nevertheless, their electric car consumes somewhere between 2 to 3 times more silver than a fuel combustion car. We all know the direction governments are going these days, trying to get fuel combustion cars off the market. So there's 2 huge drivers of silver that weren't there previously, and mine supply is dropping, and above ground supplies are dropping. So I just think there's a perfect storm coming for silver.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about your silver company. There's obviously 60 or 70, perhaps more, silver companies or pretend silver companies on public markets today. Why is it that you feel that what's different about First Majestic? Why First Majestic as opposed to a silver equity ETF or some of the other silver companies? What's unique about First Majestic, and why should our attendees care about First Majestic if they care about silver?
Well, I don't want to insult all the geologists out there because I've got a lot of them working for me, and so a lot of geologists are my friends. But I generally don't invest in mining companies that are run by a geologist. And engineers really are much better. Despite the fact I think I employ something like 500 engineers and 200 geologists, but nevertheless, I'm a finance guy. I came from the banks in the 80s. I worked for 3 national banks, so I understand the market, and I understand, trends and flows, and I think that knowledge that I have has assisted me in managing the business, unlike other CEOs of other mining companies, because when I look at things maybe a little bit differently than most, and I also look at ways to make money for people who are buying the stock, because I think my ultimate responsibility is to our shareholders, and every move I make, I know can affect the share price, and if I'm to expect that people are going to invest in First Majestic, I have to worry every single day about how can I do, what can I do to make them money when they make an investment in this company. And every single move that our management team, and I stress this throughout the company, that we have to be very careful. Timing of financings, timing of acquisitions, all these things are critical in keeping the share cap under control, and also keeping the business growing. And I think for the most part, I think I've done a fairly good job throughout my career.
You, I think, have had a history through your career of buying assets that others regarded as being long of tooth. that you
Hmm.
understood had been capital starved and employed selective capital investments and extended mine lives and, in fact, increased productions. I know that you certainly did that with Bwanamakuba when nobody cared in Zambia, and San Dimas, which had been really producing since the days of the conquistadores, and
Hmm.
in other districts of Mexico. Perhaps you could talk
Hmm.
about your most recent acquisition, Jarrett Canyon, a little change of
Sure.
direction for you in that at least economically it would seem to be gold dominant. But talk about that most recent acquisition. Talk about the asset. Talk about what you hope to be able to do with it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'll just go back just one step, Rick, before I answer that question. And it's not just San Dimas or the Guanamacuba. Every asset we bought in the history of the company, I've had a view, and of course, me, when I say me, I mean our technical team had a view that they can. There's more resources there that are currently known, um, and we could produce metal at a profit. And we've proven that by investing in expanding mills, expanding drill programs, investing the money correctly, and building the business. And not waste money is which is easy to do in the mining sector. Looking at Derrick Canyon, yes, it did not check the silver box. And we're very silver centric, and I hope our next M&A activity is going to be more silver focused. We've got lots of balls up in the air, so it's always difficult to know which ball is going to drop first. But in the case of any acquisition, whether it's San Dimas or Santa Elena or Jarrett Canyon, we ask ourselves a couple of questions. One is land tenure and jurisdiction are the most important things when it comes to buying mining assets anywhere on the planet. Then once you get through that, is there a geological view that we have that possibly the current owner doesn't have? Can we expand the resources? Can we expand life of mine? And if we do, is it profitable to take the ore out of the ground and to put it through a mill, and what processes are needed, and and so on and so forth? Can we drive costs down? Can we increase recoveries? All these kinds of questions we asked ourselves during our due diligence process. And in the case of Jarrett Canyon, we paid a good price for it, but at the same time, we think we can double its production, and without that much difficulty. This is an asset that's been in hands for 15 years that have been struggling. Eric Sprott took it out of bankruptcy about 15 years ago, or pardon me, 5 years ago, and he spent about $100 million cleaning up this asset and handed it to us in very, very good shape. The only thing he didn't do was spend money on exploration development because there's only so much money to go around. So we're now stepping into a pretty clean asset that all it needs is exploration development. And we think it's currently running at 2,200 tons per day. The mill capacity is 4,500, produce 112,000 ounces of gold in 2020. We think by the end of 23, it'll be running at about 3,500 to 4,000 tons per day, which is a little less than twice what it's currently running at.
And you believe, I guess, in exploration potential in the district, given that the thing's been producing. I remember this is a Freeport mine damn near 30 years ago. So you believe that there's plenty left where the rest came from. Is that correct?
It's shocking that no one ever drilled. They all focused on the Freeport was on the open pit. There was 3 open pits that have been abandoned. They were focusing on that, and then the previous owners went underground, the 2 previous owners went underground, and then they're mining the TSX mine and the Smith mine, which are only about less than a mile apart. We're going to run a drift to join them underground, and we're expert underground miners. We know what we're doing. And we're going to use that drift for an exploration drift to add ounces we're expecting, and also to reduce costs because they transport, all the above ground transportation is coming from 2 complete separate operations where it could be one combined operation. So that's going to immediately lower costs, and that's happening now. So it'll take about 8 to 10 months to build that drift. So by mid 2022, we should start to see costs start to drop and production start to slowly increase. And that's just step one. And this is a 40,000 hectare land package that's barely been drilled outside the known mining areas.
Keith, thank you very much. Thank you for your past successes. Thank you for the successes that you enjoyed so far with First Majestic. We look forward to your continued success with First Majestic. And all I can say with regards to your statements about the future of the silver price and the future of First Majestic is your lips to God's ear. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rick. Good seeing you again.